Okay, so in Galatians 3, it talks about how to Abraham and his seed was the promise given, right? And the promise is the Holy Covenant. Okay, God made a covenant between Abraham and himself, and he said that if you obey this covenant, I'll create my people from you. So in Galatians 3, it's talking about the sacrificial law, and it's explaining that though the sacrificial law was added, it's like 430 years after, it says that the law cannot disannul the promise because God gave it to Abraham by promise. Okay, so that is yet another scripture that is showing you that the Holy Covenant of promise is not the same thing as the sacrificial law. Okay, now in Psalm 105, right at the very end, it explains that when Moses smote the rock at Horeb, which is where Israel received the covenant of promise, which was the Ten Commandments, that when that water gushed out of the rock, God remembered his servant Moses. Okay? So that is showing you that the covenant given to Israel at Horeb is the same covenant that was given to Abraham. Okay? Now in Romans 9, and then it goes into Romans 10, it's explaining that the children of the promise are the ones who inherit the blessings of the children of God. Now they are the children of promise because they keep the covenant of promise that was given to Abraham, which Psalm 105 shows is the same covenant that God gave to Israel at Horeb, and that was the Ten Commandments. So in order for you to inherit the kingdom of heaven, which is the ultimate sort of fulfillment of the promise to Abraham, if you are to enter the kingdom of heaven, you have to be keeping the Ten Commandments. You absolutely have to. Okay? So, all of you Christians in the church who think that you don't have to keep the Ten Commandments anymore because, Jesus ended the law. He ended the sacrificial law that was added to the covenant because of transgression of the covenant. He didn't end the covenant. Of course he didn't end the covenant, because the covenant's the Ten Commandments. And in order for you to inherit the promise of the children of promise, you have to keep the covenant of promise. And I'm just going to say it again. Psalm 105 literally shows you, plain as day, that the covenant that Israel received at Horeb is the same covenant that God gave to Abraham. And it's even right there in Exodus 19. Obey this covenant and I'll be your God and you'll be my people. Well, God doesn't have two peoples. He said to Abraham, if you keep this covenant, I'll create my people from you. And then to Israel, he says, keep this covenant and I'll be your God, you'll be my people. Okay, so, for you to say that there's Israel in the church and, you don't have to keep the Ten Commandments anymore because you're not under the law, you've been deceived. The Messiah warned you not to be deceived. The disciples all say to him, Yeshua, what's the sign of your return? First thing he says, be not deceived. Let no man deceive you. And now here you are, thinking to yourselves that you don't have to keep the covenant of promise, and yet you'll still become the children of promise. Unbelievable how deceived you are. But, it is written, so of course you're going to be deceived. But that is just, I was just watching a brother's video and he was reading Galatians, and that verse just jumped out at us. I was like, wow. It's literally right there as well. It's all the way through Galatians, so it's not surprising, but that particular verse, this particular time, just really jumped out. So you got to understand this difference. You'll never ever understand the gospel if you don't, because the gospel is the refreshing of the covenant. And if you don't understand that the sacrificial law was added to the holy covenant because Israel broke the covenant, and then then Yeshua came along, sent by God to end the sacrificial law, to become the curse for us. The law was a curse, so Yeshua became a curse. He became accursed. He took the punishment of the sacrificial law. And then he taught us the holy covenant. Deuteronomy 18, Luke 1:72. He came to teach everything that was desired at Horeb. Everything that was desired at Horeb is what Israel received when Moses smote the rock, when God remembered his servant Abraham. And then Luke 1:72, he came to remember the Holy Covenant and the mercies promised to our fathers. The mercies was that God was going to send the Messiah who was going to refresh the covenant. You've got to understand this.